Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're discussing the great mistake of the Inquisition with Inquisitor Kryptman's gamble. Spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k story Deathwatch Kryptman's War by author Ian St. Martin. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So earlier in the week, we discussed the toll of the Tyranids, how in the Imperium's upcoming war, with the latest emergence of another vast tendril of Leviathan, they could be facing some very brutal decisions. How it's become frighteningly more common to sacrifice less important worlds on the High Fleet's path to save others. And the example we used for this was the old school story Warriors of Ultramar, part of the Uriel Ventress series. Now within that, Uriel was tasked with defending the world of Tarsis Ultra from the freshly emerged High Fleet Leviathan, the original appearance of Leviathan. And here he came into argument and disagreement with the legendary Inquisitor Kryptman, Lord Inquisitor as a matter of fact, promoted due to his role with High Fleet Behemoth and the discovery of the Tyranid race. Kryptman, as a member of the Inquisition, contemplated the entirety of the wider Imperium's survival, the cold harsh reality of numbers, and in knowing the Tyranids perhaps greater than anybody else, he was prepared to wipe out worlds on the Tyranids' path, to simply deny them resources. The fact that these worlds still had millions of Imperial citizens and loyal soldiers on, inconsequential to the larger picture. For Lord Inquisitor Kryptman, and it has to be said many members of the Inquisition, a necessary sacrifice for the Imperium's survival. Now that decision of course was absolutely abhorrent to the loyal Captain Ventress, who felt it his duty to at least attempt to defend the loyal Imperial citizens. As a loyal son of the Ultramarines, you would expect no less. As it was, Kryptman did what Inquisitors do, whatever he wanted, and thus millions died at the hands of Exterminatus. And this really led me on to thinking about more of Lord Inquisitor Kryptman's actions, most notably his great gamble, turning the Tyranids against the Orks. Now, Inquisitor Kryptman's gamble has been mentioned in several codexes over the years. However, for me, the best place to get real insight into the story is the story Deathwatch Kryptman's War, as it covered not only Kryptman taking the decision, but also its repercussions. And you may be thinking, what's the big deal? Tyranids fighting Orks. I don't see a problem. But it's not that straightforward. And with the actions of the Inquisition, things very rarely are. As can be seen from the objections that Kryptman received before he even initiated his plan. It cannot be done, whispered the flickering spectre. It simply must not be done. Giants of harsh light ringed the darkened chamber, shivering intermittently from hololithic projectors. They encircled the chamber's lone occupant, looming over him as they voiced their sanction. The course you set to undertake cannot be allowed, said the projection of a High Lord. Your mandate is to prevent the subjects of the God Emperor from falling to such a fate. It is unthinkable, said another of the projections, an inquisitorial rosette shining proudly on her uniform. It is madness. It is genocide. We are supposed to protect them. The man at the center of the chamber lifted a hand. The projections froze, halted in the heat of their denouncement. Now, the High Lords of Terror, for all the ideals of their position, could hardly be said to be caring, at least previously to Guilliman's return and replacing of most of them. A big part of the Imperium's decline could well be laid directly at their door over the years, the selfish decisions that they have historically made. And we don't know here if Kryptman had contacted them, or if somehow they had received word of Kryptman's intentions, and thus, judging by their responses, sought to prevent it. Considering the secretive nature of the Inquisition, you'd assume it more likely he has informed them of his intent, and the reasons why. However, to have such a visceral and passionate reaction to Kryptman's plan here, with claims of madness and genocide, reveals that Kryptman's intentions must be far more grievous than you may first suspect. However, much like we discussed with his exterminatus of Cordelis earlier in the week, the Lord Inquisitor isn't one to have his mind swayed, and he is more than prepared to deceive or betray with his actions if he has to. And with every glimpse of Kryptman you see, you can't help but feel that he is absolutely convinced that he knows best, especially when it comes to the Tyranids. Yes, he has devoted his life to studying them, to stopping them. I mean, he named the very race. He most likely is the foremost expert of them in the entire galaxy. But maybe with that, there does come a price. Maybe he has convinced himself that he alone knows what's right, what's best. And no matter the objections, no matter the other points of view or alternate ideas, his mind is already locked in a way that can never be swayed. And there's a very telling line that, to me, reveals that could well be the case. As Kryptman's meeting is interrupted and he freezes the communications, we get the line, "He sighed. Each of them wields such formidable power," he thought. Yet none of them possesses the foresight to see what is coming. None have the conviction to do what is necessary. Now, to be fair to Kryptman here, he could be right. It appears from the previous description that it's at least one High Lord and maybe other Inquisitors. Perhaps they don't understand the true threats the Tyranids represent. However, it's clear from the manner of these inner thoughts that he wasn't going to be happy with anything other than a rejoicing agreement, a universal backing of his intentions. And you really can't ignore the possibility that in all Kryptman's studying, in all his experience, he has become obsessed in his own voice. He has become so obsessed in his own voice, he's stopped listening to others. Now, Kryptman then ends the communications and is greeted by a Deathwatch kill team he had already summoned, led by a watch captain Artemis. And even this further reinforces the fact that Kryptman was never going to listen to another point of view, even that of a High Lord, because he had already summoned the watch team he needed. And in wanting to know why the Inquisitor had requested their presence, we get an unveiling of not only what the Inquisitor's actual intentions are, but also the reasoning behind it. The Tyranids. Artemis held the Inquisitor's stare. Behemoth has returned. No, this is another strain entirely. We have designated this tendril and its hive fleet as Leviathan. Why do you not marshal the battle fleets? Asked Harrick. Deploy the full forces at the Inquisition's disposal against such a threat. Because you don't have them, do you? Said Artemis. The Inquisitor said nothing as the watch captain stepped closer. Cadia burns under another of the archenemy's Black Crusades. Every ship, every weapon, every mortal who can carry a weapon is being sent to repel them, bleeding the resources elsewhere white. You don't have anything to stand against this Leviathan. And so, replied the Inquisitor, to survive, we must adopt new tactics. The Leviathan will enter Ultima Segmentum. We cannot prevent that. But, he turned, pointing to the hololith of the advancing Tyranids. What if we could direct its course, guide it away from Imperial systems, and towards those of a mutual adversary? Artemis noted the proximity of the tendril of Leviathan and the Ork Empire of Octarius. You mean to force the Tyranids into a war with the Greenskins? So, Kryptman's intent was to somehow guide the tendril of Leviathan into the Ork Empire. Considering the state of the situation that Artemis described, with the Imperium entire reeling from Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, with this being previously to Cadia's destruction, I can see a certain logic to Kryptman's thinking here. He can't defend the Imperium with no army. He certainly can't stop a hive fleet. So is turning it into the Orks instead of letting it come on two Imperial worlds so bad? Well, it is worth noting that Kryptman is largely silent for that interaction, allowing Artemis's mind to do the work for him. And of course it is quite possible Abaddon's crusade had stretched the Imperium as thin as Artemis described, as again we all know all too well how it eventually turned out. However, I do find it a little stretch to believe the Imperium in its entirety couldn't marshal the forces necessary. However, admittedly, we know how agonizingly slow it takes the Imperium to do pretty much anything, so by then it could well have been too late. Now, the kill team react largely unfavourably to this intention, as it's their sworn duty to destroy the Xeno, regardless of the situation, feeling it a heresy to do anything less. However, the watch captain Artemis's intrigue was clearly piqued, and for me, I really think the key for swaying his interest in the idea was the Inquisitor's response. What if we could direct its course, guide it away from Imperial systems and towards those of a mutual adversary? Again, the key, away from Imperial systems. Kryptman's plan is heresy, no doubt about it. The Xenos are to be destroyed. But the argument here to the kill team is to spare human life, a necessary evil to save those loyal to the Emperor. The plan is largely simple and straightforward, if no doubt somewhat difficult to execute. Preceding the tendril of Leviathan, there was a Space Hulk. As usually the way for the Tyranids, Gene Stealers silently stowed aboard, infiltrating worlds they find, sending the psychic signal that draws the hive fleet near. The Inquisitor's intent was to capture several Gene Stealers alive and send them into the Ork Empire, thus altering the hive fleet's direction into it. To double down on its necessity, the Inquisitor left the kill team in no doubt that if the hive fleet wasn't diverted, if the Ork Empire wasn't thwarted, all of the Eastern Fringe and beyond would fall. For the Imperium may be able to stop one of these threats, but never both. If the Tyranids didn't annihilate them, the Orks would. And so Artemis accepted the mission. he and his kill team would go out, board the Space Hulk, and capture 2 Genestealers, at a great personal cost. But Kryptman's plan was launched. The Hive Fleet's tendril was ultimately diverted into the Ork Empire. The Imperium had been saved. Except it wasn't quite that simple. Kryptman's plan would ultimately fail. Rather than the 2 factions eradicating each other, both of them grew stronger. For all of the Inquisitor's expertise, it seemed he fundamentally misunderstood the creatures he was dealing with. Or at least, and quite possibly, was disingenuous with his ultimate ambitions. Kryptman's gamble, his roll of the dice to save the Imperium, and thus the Inquisition'S, failed. And we'll continue this discussion with the repercussions of that next time. But as always everyone, what do you think? Was Inquisitor Kryptman's intentions here flawed? In sending the tendril of Leviathan into the Ork Empire, was there ever going to be a good outcome? Do you see the logic in his idea? Or do you see it as a straight highway to hell? That it was madness to even attempt it? And how do you feel Kryptman's mindset played into his decision making? Is he correct in his conviction? Or are there signs there that he's gone beyond the borders of rational debate? That perhaps he has become so consumed with the Tyranid race, he's become a prisoner within his own mind. For me, I definitely see a logic to it. 2 enemies fighting each other. However, I personally feel Kryptman's intent was more likely a simple biding for time. I think he had to know there was little hope of this ending well. The Tyranids thrive on feeding, which the Orks would provide in plentiful number. And the Tyranids would provide an unending war, something the Orks in turn aspire to. The conflict really is right up both species' street. He may not have anticipated both sides emerging greater than before, but he surely must have realised that one could well end up stronger than before. If the Tyranids feasted on the entire Ork Empire, that would be a colossal strength added to the Hive Fleet. And if the Orks emerged victorious, the war that would have been formed could have been beyond comprehension. Maybe the Inquisitor's intent was simply to tie the 2 forces up long enough for the 13th Black Crusade to be defeated, enabling the Imperium to draw together its vast resources to combat the emerging threat. That certainly makes sense. However, as we know, it would fail. And the Inquisition had a huge mess to deal with. But as always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers. Your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. With that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.